I remember actually Artblocks contacted me and asked me to actually send it in. And I remember my heart thumping and thought that I did it. I did what I wanted to.
GM everyone, and welcome to Fuel for Thought, where we explore the multifaceted world of Web3 through the lenses of different industries and thought leaders. My name is Chris, and today I have my favorite artist at the moment with me on the podcast. That's Kristian Stoveland, but I'll call him Per because that's much easier for me. How are you today, Per?
I'm doing fine, GM, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, I'm absolutely thrilled. So guys, for your reference, Per is the artist behind the very famous collection curated by Artblocks, The Harvest. He also collaborated recently with Art on Internet through the Artblocks engine, together with Red Bull and Bybit for two collections that we'll talk about during the episode. And he's also the founder of Void Studio, which is an art studio, if I'm correct, but we'll dig into that as well. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to contrast here, so that's going to be interesting. The episode will follow a little bit of a structure, so for you guys to know what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about Per's background, what led him to become an artist on the blockchain. Then we're going to talk about his work and the most recent pieces that we can all see on Ethereum and admire and enjoy and collect. And then the last part will be focused on what's next for Per and how he sees his artist career evolve. So let's get started. The first question I have for you is, you're Norwegian. You grew up in Africa. You were part of a rock band, and then eventually this all led you to become an artist on the blockchain. So can you tell us how this all came together?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's when you put it that way, it sounds a bit strange, but yeah, that's been kind of my the red thread through my life. But yeah, I'm a Norwegian citizen, born in Norway, to Norwegian parents, and my father is a civil engineer working with water sanitation. So he got engaged by a nonprofit organization here in Norway to help out in Africa. So we moved down there when I was about 2 years old, and went to school there and kind of lived as an expat in Africa, and came back to Norway when I was 10. Hadn't experienced, or I had experienced snow as a 1-year-old, but I couldn't remember that. So I experienced snow for the first time when I was 10, which was a crazy experience. But other than that, I had a normal Norwegian upbringing in the teens, where I got into music, played, metal, black metal. I'm from Norway. What else are you going to play? I think my first, during that period, I went to a Montessori school as a child, so that I was really kind of learning by playing very early in life. Montessori is a private school established. I'm not sure about the history, but early 1900s, maybe somewhere after the First World War, I think. A lady called Montessori, I can't remember her first name, started this school where the idea was to is the way you teach children is more, you use more play, drawing, and an artistic approach to learning, even in math. Drew a lot of patterns and used math to kind of play around with that. So I did kind of from the start have I learned to approach problems sometimes in an artistic way. I'm still a very logical person. So the mix there has been interesting for me, though. But then we started the band, and I realized we were going to record a record, and we needed some kind of CD cover. This was in the 90s. So that's where I got into design. I was very passionate and interested about the image of our band, probably more than the others. And how the CD cover was going to look was something I really cared about. And that's when I realized that design is something that I want to work on. even though I was 15, 16 and really into the music and thought that was really cool, there was this voice in the back of my head telling me that it's quite hard to earn a living on this. So look for something else maybe. And design was what I went for then. So I went to design school, a regular graphic design school. And quickly after that, I got into web development with Flash. It's a program that came out in, Macromedia Flash was bought up by Adobe and then finally got put to death by Apple. But in that period where it had its height, I used Flash a lot, and that was my gateway into coding. And I started more and more programming rather than designing, and using programming to design. And at some point, I started calling myself a developer instead of a designer, even though I still use both of these subjects in my daily life. And after some time, I got into the ad and design agency business or industry here in Oslo. And at some point, I got tired of that. And in 2015, I quit that job and started and founded my own company or studio is more like it, with a few other of my friends. And we have been, that's called Void. And this is where I spend most of my time at the moment. And about 2 years ago, I got into NFTs and have been through a journey there. So I'm I would say that the NFT part of me is more a personal kind of journey, whilst Void is the journey I have with my family, if you know what I mean. So I'm still. Both of them are very important to me. So I'll be. I'm still struggling with finding the right balance between the two and making that work.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on that in the let's say later part of the interview, where we'll explore how you see the future and how you see your career evolve. But before that, so you talked about your background and what brought you to the art world, but then what brought you to the blockchain specifically? Like, how come you started being an artist on the blockchain, and then what was your journey from dabbling with the blockchain to becoming a curated artist on art blogs, which is probably the best thing you can do on the blockchain right now as an artist?
Yeah, well, it was. It's been a long road though. So how I got into NFTs was to start off with, in the when I started getting to Flash and started programming, a lot of the way I taught myself programming was basically through generative art. So that's something I did a lot of at that time, but that was way before NFTs and the blockchain. So, generative art and the generative art approach has always been the way it's always been the way Void is working too. A lot of what we do is, parametric design. But getting into NFTs was something. So maybe a year before I came into NFTs, I heard about NFTs, and I was that classic guy. You can always right-click save. Why do I need to buy it? And I think over time, I got more and more exposed to it and started to see some of the point of it. But I think the thing that really flipped the coin is that one of my colleagues at Void he was earlier into NFTs than I was, I think in, start of 2021. And he got into art blocks, and I had the opportunity to kind of sit behind his shoulder and watch him as he kind of built his collection and released it. And during that process, I really saw the symbiosis that generative art and the blockchain, it really kind of meshes well together, because you can upload that script once to the blockchain and just use the individual tokens as the seed for the artwork. That for me is quite beautiful to think about. Not saying that other type of NFTs isn't worth it, but that's kind of what brought me into it. And as soon as that clicked and I understood that, I was going, I did this 15 years ago all the time. I want to give it a shot. I started just getting back into generative art. I was rusty. I wanted to go back in. There was a lot I did in Void that could kind of be transferred over to that, but there was it had been a while since I did some JavaScript, at least JavaScript that was not functional in a way, or artsy. So I started off, using the programs that I was quite familiar at that point, like C++ and open frameworks, to generate a lot. I was, image-based NFTs and video. So I got into known origin and foundation, created some artwork there, and not long after that, FX Hash opened shop, and that was kind of when I hopped into Tezos, because the economic barrier was so much smaller than it was in Ethereum. It was at the time when it wasn't proof by stake but proof of work. So it was quite a high barrier to get in there. So I started dabbling on FX Hash, and the community there was fantastic. I mean, the whole experience of FX Hash and what they managed to build there it's quite unique. And that gave me the opportunity to test how to create an artwork that you didn't know what the result was going to be until you actually minted it, which is a different way of working than I was used to, because you have to make sure that all edge cases are taken care of, so the artwork always looks nice. And released a few collections there, and at some point I did the We Are Alone Together, which was the last project I released there. I sat back and thought, okay, I feel quite kind of comfortable in doing. Yeah, I'm not sure the correct word is doing something for real, but something that was kind of. So the artwork on FX, yeah, not on chain, but more like, so there is a barrier between what I did on these first collection on FX Hash, because a lot of that was it's me, but a lot of that is a result of experimentation and playing around. Whilst when I did that, I sat back and said, and there was a lot of there was short time between each collection, but I knew that at some point I wanted to do something that was me, if you know what I mean. I had to find myself, and like you said earlier, is that I kind of found my identity with these last collections on Ethereum, and I think there's some truth to that, because the Harvest kind of that was a project it took basically almost a year from I started playing around with it until I ended up with the result. And the approach I had there was more, I knew the direction I wanted to go before I started experimenting, which is
so you had an image in your head of the result, and you said, how do I translate it into code?
Kind of. I was more instead of letting my experimentation take me to where the project is going, it was more like I had an idea and I was kind of guiding the algorithm to go that way. There's a lot of things that were different from what I visualized in the beginning, but that's also natural in that process, I think. But the concept of having a landscape being harvested came very early in the process when I was working. It all started with building the landscape generator, and during that process there, the imagery of how I was going to do these beams started popping into my head.
So here's a question for you, because reflecting on your journey, you're, let's say, come back to Ethereum through art blocks, and then the other collections you released, and we're going to touch on that. It really feels like with your comeback on Ethereum, you found your style, and we were discussing that earlier. And now there's a visual consistency between the different pieces you create. Like, of course, it's not the same, but you know that it's perk, doing that work. And so for the Harvest, if we start with the Harvest, what inspired you to create that landscape and that story of, the Harvest? And please, tell us what the story is, because it's quite complex.
Yeah. Well, it can be complex. Yeah, I think so. The whole idea of Harvest started a bit before summer in 2022. Yeah. We have this summer cabin in my family that we often have our summers at. And this is by the sea. We have a boat, and it's not these classical big fjords you see way longer up north, but most of Norway's coastline is very fjord-ish. So I remember taking the boat out just on the ocean and looking back on the landscape, and it's hard to explain, but I mean, I just felt that, yeah, landscape, that's what I'm going to do next. And but I hadn't kind of nailed on what story behind it was going to be. So when I started building this landscape, I started playing around with these beams, and I think it must have been one or two of the first outputs I got. When I saw that beam hit, I knew that the story just popped into my head that something is harvesting this land. It could be violent and beautiful at the same time. And the story, so that was the kind of the initial point I went in, and building on this story happened whilst I was working. I often use a lot of music to, instrumental and symphonic music, especially, film scores. I can't have vocals there because that will mess up with my thinking. So
Do you play a little bit of
instrumental.
Hans Zimmer, or what do you play when you work? And
Definitely Hans Zimmer from Interstellar is one of them. But I think the record I heard most of was from the music score for Arrival by Johan Johansson. May he rest in peace. A lot of that music kind of science fiction has always been inspiring for me. So a lot of the music score from science fiction movies has been influenced there. So I'm probably sure a lot of that has influenced me whilst I was working. But the idea behind the harvest is that each artwork in the collection is a snapshot of an entity I have named the caretaker is harvesting. So the caretaker is this kind of entity that has lived millennia in slumber. And this entity has its cyclic, has a cycle. And at this time, he has just awoken and needs to replenish its depleted resources. And therefore, he sends out his minions of drones, which he can control from anywhere in the galaxy, and sends them out to harvest these planets, which he is kind of the caretaker of. So there's kind of a symbiosis between these worlds and the caretaker. So that's kind of the main big story around Harvest.
Yeah, when I read the description of the collection, I thought it was sort of a relationship where, well, he's called the caretaker, but I thought he was exploiting the resources. While it seems from what you're saying, it's more like a symbiotic relationship where he takes care of the land and then takes a little bit from it to sustain himself and then repeats the cycle. So that's interesting. And what was also interesting, just to bounce on what you said before, it's so interesting you mentioned, the artists you listen to while you're creating, because now it all makes sense. When you look at the artworks, you're like, yeah, I can see a little bit of, I think it's Cornfield Chase from Interstellar in the work.
Exactly,
and then right.
Yep.
And then I can feel also a little bit of Olafur Arnold, if you listen to that as well, and like all those artists, I can sense it now. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think for me, what really kind of artwork or what you say, experiences that strike me with awe often have some common denominators, and that's landscapes, open landscapes, being isolated or alone, because that makes room for contemplation. I think any artwork that depicts or hits on any of these three kind of traits is something that probably I'm going to stop and explore a bit. And I think Harvest really, for me at least, really nails that feeling, especially when you listen to the music I listened to when I built it. Because and also if you see I'm not sure if you've seen that, but I had this teaser video of the Harvest when I was allowed to announce that I was curated. I created that, and because I've been listening to I forget the name of the song, but one of the songs in the Arrival soundtrack. I was listening a lot to that one at that point, and so I had to kind of accompany that 20-second bit from that song into the release, and I felt that really kind of amplified the whole experience of the collection.
And how's the experience of being curated and creating a collection for art blocks? And we're going to contrast that with then the next collection we're going to talk about, Pursuit, and your collaboration with Red Bull. But here, is art block sort of the enabler of your art, or is there also a framework you have to work within?
So, are you talking technically?
Well, in any way you see, like
Yeah.
how's the collaboration? Does it expand your capabilities, or is it also a little bit restrictive from a creative perspective? I'm curious.
No, so the process there. So what happened is that after quite a few months of working on the project, I came to a point where I felt it wasn't finished. Not all palettes were made. There were still some tweaks to the traits, making more variability. But I came to a point where the proof of concept was very solid. And what I did there was kind of go to different platforms and just talk to them, see if they're interested. And the idea was always I was also going to send into art blocks. So what I did was just kind of talk to a few platforms. People were they were really nice, gave a lot of good feedback. And I also got I remember actually Artblocks contacted me and asked me to actually send it in, and so I did. And that dialogue takes some time, but what basically happens there is that they look at your project, they review it, and you get a feedback if they're going to accept you or not. And at that point, when you're accepted, you get pulled into their kind of ecosystem, and there's no technical restriction other than that you need to know which libraries you're going to use in your project, and they enable quite a few libraries, but you're restricted in that way. But it didn't feel as a restriction for me because they cover quite a lot of different libraries. I mainly use P5.js. And after going through a couple of rounds where I upload it and test it and do some test mints, we get away all the bugs, the technical bugs and stuff like that. And there's a final review where they make sure that each artwork looks the same on every type of device and stuff like that. And when that is finished, they do a review to see if you're going to be curated. And I remember I was quite nervous, or yeah, I had a lot of anticipation there, but it took about 5-6 days from they started the review till I got the message on Discord. And I remember my heart thumping and thought that I did it. I did what I wanted to. But I remember also I got that message at probably about November, December in 2022, and I knew that they couldn't release before end of January the following year. So I remember there was a couple of months where I had to wait, but that opened up for that. It was quite nice when I look at projects I've done after, is that the deadline, there wasn't this kind of deadline. I was finished with mostly finished with the project. I got into the art blocks and the system there, and the time from I got accepted as a curated until we actually released, I still had some opportunity to do some small tweaks. Yeah.
And so now jumping to the more recent collections, including Pursuit, I'll be interested to contrast your experience there, because basically you made your comeback to Ethereum. You launched on art blocks. That was huge. Curated, like, I guess that really rocketed your perception in the space. And then it opened doors. One of them was collaborating with Red Bull for their curated Velocity series, and you created Pursuit for that purpose. Now it's a smaller supply, then the harvest is half, it's 200 pieces. But the style is very similar. Like the artworks are very different, but you perceive the style very similar. And that's what I was saying before. Like there's this consistency in your artworks. And I really, really like those pieces. So what was the creative process behind it? Because here it was different. It's not like you're the only person defining what you're going to create. There's also the framework of the brand, isn't it? So how was the process there?
That's interesting you're asking, a good question, because the process was quite different. Because harvest was I could use the time I wanted. I was the master of when it was going to be ready. But the whole project with the Velocity series was more like a commission type of working, if you know what I mean. I'm quite familiar with that because that's kind of what we do in Void and my earlier and in my earlier career. But yeah, sorry, my train of thought, I just lost it. Where were we?
Yeah, so we were talking about pursuit and the creative process behind it, and how the
Yeah,
brand framework
right.
enabled your process of creation.
Right. So what happened is that so Art on the Internet, I've had a dialogue with them since before Harvest was launched. And they helped me out a bit with the marketing of Harvest. So we already had a relation. And I think about a month or so after that, AOI contacted me again and said that they wanted to start up this new Velocity series with Red Bull and Bybit. So they were already engaged into this dialogue about creating this Velocity Pass, and he asked me if I was interested, and told me he was talking to both Snowfo and Rick, and I said I can't. I was already quite stressed out with the workload I had with the aftermath of Harvest, and also keeping up to date with Void. But that opportunity was so was I couldn't let that opportunity go from me. So I said yes to that and started thinking more in a commercial way of getting to where you want to go. And so I went through that was more of a regular kind of process where I have this concept phase. I think about what I want to make, do a lot of research, and Pinterest is a lot of. I get a lot of inspiration just browsing Pinterest. I mean, you can see a picture. It might not have anything to do with what you want to create, but there might be something on that picture that starts firing up thoughts in your mind, and you start Googling for or searching for other type of imagery that sparked, if you see what I mean. And after some time of thinking about the concept, I landed on this idea, because the question I wanted to answer, or the question I felt that they asked me, is that what does velocity look like in your world? That was kind of the question I wanted to answer. And I've also been interested in Formula One since I was a kid, more like, typical boy likes cars thing. I'm stereotypical there. But but over time, I learned about how the technology that goes into it and how cutting edge Formula One is. So I've always been fascinated by it. Haven't been that hardcore fan, but as soon as we talked about Red Bull and the Velocity series, Formula One came up, and for me the aesthetics of these courses are really interesting to me. So for me I knew I wanted to do it in this landscape which Harvest lives in, but I wanted to do it different enough that it feels like a different collection. And what I did there, I got inspired by the aesthetics of the courses of Formula One, and at the same time, I also got really inspired by open shutter images of cars passing by. You get these red streaks flowing, and those two concepts were basically what was the initial thoughts of Pursuit. So I wanted to mimic those the open shutter and the energy that goes into each turn, and kind of trying to get a snapshot of what velocity is at some point in time. And so I think most of my work went into how to create these Formula One course shapes and making sure that they are aesthetically pleasing, make sense, and that they position themselves correctly in the composition. Yeah, I think that was probably the hardest part to get right. And there was also this other caveat, is that one thing I learned during this process is that each turn in each course has its name and has IP attached to it. So I had to be sure they don't look too much or is recognizable as a turn in one of the actual courses. So there's some fine tuning I had to do there.
I didn't know about
Yeah.
it. What I like personally in Pursuit is that there's this. So it's your work because there's sort of like this mountainous alpine forest kind of landscape or base, and then you have those colorful light streaks or parts of the image, and they really contrast well because you have this black base with then the colors flowing through. And what's interesting is that you can see it in two ways. You can see it from the racing standpoint. Okay, it looks like those lights of cars passing through the night and in photography, or you have this really landscape perspective where it's like colorful rivers flowing through the forest, and it's really elemental, similar to the harvest, where you find like there's light or air, sort of like something being very aerial, being taken from the land, and here it's like more aquatic, flowing through the forest. So that's really interesting, and I thought it was a very clever way to interpret velocity, not in a literal way that would come to mind when a racing brand comes to you and says, hey, please make an artwork inspired by velocity from the racetracks. So that was really, really a great way to interpret the brand.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, I mean, you can definitely look at it that way. There are some artworks there where I feel that it's a river kind of just flowing through. And very happy to hear you say that, because I feel the same way. And the reasoning for keeping these artworks back. So don't believe me, I tried testing other ways of using the palettes. And I even tried to, often when I do testing and do some early testing, I often use palettes I've used before and just copy paste them into to see how color affects the project. And I used some of the Harvest palettes with the light background, or with a white background. What I realized is that the whole idea of the streaks just lost, for me at least, its meaning if the background wasn't dark. So quite quickly, I decided that this collection is going to be dark. I wanted to be a bit more. I wanted to be very homogeneous, so you just know it's from that series. Yeah, that's.
I
Yeah, that's
have a
basically
question
it.
for you regarding the collaboration with a brand to make artworks. Do you believe, and this was a discussion I had on a Twitter space quite recently, and people had, varying perspectives. So I'm curious for yours. Do you think that collaborating with a brand on an art collection contributes to sort of the credibility and the value of the art? Or do you think that it sort of devalues it and makes it lose its sort of like purity?
Well, that's a very good question, because that was one of the first things I thought about when I got asked. Because I mean, how should I say it? There is, of course, the perception of being a sellout when you get this opportunity, which I thought about. But at some point, you know yourself if why you're doing this, if you know what I mean. Of course, it's attractive to kind of be attached to a brand that is that well known. Their ambition was to kind of, get art into a broader audience and get more people on board, which is a good thing. But yeah, I was very aware of that situation. But I think, to answer your question, I think it's very up to how you choose to answer kind of the question, and how you yourself choose to talk about this collaboration. And also, you would have to have some, red lines yourself if you see what I mean. So I did have some. I knew that I had some areas which I did not want to be, stepped over by someone else. That's kind of why they asked me, is how I think. You guys asked me to do this. I said yes, but there is a implicit understanding, if you ask me, that there's a barrier for how far in they can actually go in and tweak what you want to do. I mostly had the dialogue with AOI on the artwork and getting there. We had this kind of final talk with actually from representatives from Red Bull. They had some feedback. Some of it I agreed with, and some of it and gave me ideas to just tweak it in a better way. But there were some things that were asked that I said I didn't want to do. So I feel to answer your question, I think as long as you're aware of that situation and you yourself already know how you would react in given different situations, I think it can be a positive thing. But in the end, I'm not able to control how other people perceive that situation. And I can't talk to everybody about how I think about that. So at some point, you just need to kind of accept that not everybody sees it the same way. But I mean, in the end, it's how you carry yourself, I guess. If it's obvious that you have what should I say? Kind of chipped on your own integrity, I think that's a bad thing. But in another way, asking the question, what does velocity in your world look like? It is quite a challenge, actually, because when you are yourself and you're alone, you can do whatever you want. There's no restrictions. It can be daunting its own way because there's a lot of decisions you have to take, but at the same time, it's very liberating. But having a concrete task you're supposed to answer can at some point also make or break a good artist versus a not so good artist, I would say, because I learned from a design teacher is that if you get a job or a design job that you don't like because you don't like the brand or you don't like the way it's going, the answer my teacher always told me is that, well, then you're thinking about it wrong. It's your job to make that job fun. And that has kind of resonated me since school and a way I think. So if I get the opportunity to work on something that I'm not sure if it's going to be cool enough, I'm not sure how that, it's up to you basically to make it good or make it cool or,
Right. And to me, this was a successful collaboration because Red Bull was very authentic in the way they approached it. They surrounded themselves with the right partners and the right artists. And it was really not sort of a branding exercise as much as it was a curation of artists around a theme. And you yourself really skillfully managed to navigate this, like the brand's theme with your own style. So, it's a collection that I really appreciate myself. But as far as I recall, there was a second aspect to that collaboration, which was the third collection you released recently. That was Echo of Intensity. So how does this one sort of fit in with Pursuit? And what was the process behind that piece? How did it come to life?
So the whole thing started with the collection that ended up as being Pursuit. But down the line, I mean, the dialogue between Red Bull, Bybit, and AOI they did their thing while I was working on my thing. And during that process, I was approached again and said, we've been thinking about how we're going to do these auctions and how we're going to do the actual pass and stuff like that. And what we're seeing now is that we would like each artist to actually make one main collection and then one kind of open edition. And they asked me if would you be able to do that? And I said, yeah, sure. I could make. My idea then was to just make a variant of Pursuit and use some other palette that wasn't in there. But but at some point we agreed that was a bit not differentiating enough. And also together, AOI and I came to the conclusion that what if we, instead of making an open edition where you have one artwork that is just multiple editions of, how about we make an open edition that's actually generative and which is actually unique for each artwork, but still kind of get that open edition feeling that it's not, I mean, the variety between each is quite small, but there's no one that's different. And there's, at the same time, we also could get this ability to create some rarity in it, which for me, as I'm, back in the day, I was in the teens, I was playing this Magic the Gathering. I'm not sure if you know about it, but it's old school. Yeah. So I know that feeling of getting something rare and, that whole aspect there, which I felt I could play a bit more with on a open edition like this rather than Pursuit, because Pursuit and Harvest, the artwork is the alpha and the omega. The traits is just a derivative. But I would say it's creating some, real rarity in the open edition felt was much more, I don't know, fun, because the idea with this open edition was getting it to being easy access to my artwork and to the Velocity series. So therefore, getting in some rarity would be, this, we could help people get this euphoric feeling of getting a rare. So the process of Echo of Intensity was that we were going to make this generative artwork, or generative open edition, I would like to call it. And what I wanted to do is kind of zoom into what is typically the style which has kind of materialized in myself this last year, and get a zoomed in effect and just experience the intensity that you get from high velocity, that rush you can get. So the Echo of Intensity is basically just a snapshot of getting right into and just living in that intense turn which you're seeing in the Echo of Intensity. So it's basically just a fragment of what Pursuit and Harvest and the others are.
What natural aspect, what landscape or element have you installed in that piece? Like, how would you define it? To me, it looks a little bit like seismic graphs, but how would you define it?
Good question. So what I did for Echo Intensity on the landscape part is I wanted to have a bit more of a flatter kind of landscape, because you're zooming in and the composition would become awkward if you were unlucky enough to get a wrong hill somewhere. So I wanted to have it more flat, but just a little noisy. And then in some artworks, you'll get these spires pop up, which has become, you can see the spires in Harvest, and you can see the spires in Pursuit. And just to touch a little bit into that, there's some similar landscape you can see in both Harvest and Pursuit, but there's also some differing. And the idea here is that in my head, these two artworks, they live in the same universe, maybe on different worlds, but maybe the same. So we're probably going to touch on that a bit later, but the whole idea with Harvest and Pursuit, I'm kind of building on a story which is going to evolve. So you asked earlier, you said that the caretaker seems like a giving person, a kind person, or not person, entity would be more correct. But yeah, you could be right. But what if there are civilizations that have started forming on these worlds during that long time of slumber? What happens when he starts messing with that? And these are questions I'm asking myself in the future, because there's also another idea is that, like I said, I've been interested in sci-fi, and I also had this fantasy that when I'm retired, when I'm old, when I don't have anything to do, I'm going to write science fiction books. I want to write stories. Because I've played a lot of tabletop role playing games. So storytelling has been very important to me since I was a teen. And I knew I had these, some sci-fi stories in my head which I want to flesh out. So when I'm retired, I'm going to write a book or more. Yeah. So the thing is that what I realized with Harvest is that I can tell stories through collections. I can tell the same stories, but in a different way with artwork. So this is kind of the ideas I'm exploring at the moment. Is it possible to kind of tell a saga with just artwork and collections? Yeah. So I'm expecting that we're going to see we're going to see that story of the caretaker evolving in the future.
So let's talk about that. And before we dig in, I'll summarize two things that I really like about your work and how you approached it so far. There's the consistency in your style that we can find in all the pieces you've released on Ethereum recently. And then the second is, it seems like there was a on purpose structure to the pricing tiers on your artworks. Maybe it was on purpose, maybe not, and curious for your feedback on that. But the Harvest is 3.5 ETH now on the floor. Then you have Pursuit, which is around 1 ETH. And then you have Echo of Intensity, which is much more approachable, which is around 0.03 ETH. So you have this sort of like different levels at which you can get exposure to your art as a collector. How are you planning the next steps? Is there anything in the works, and how are you going to approach bringing in more work in a way that, feels like it's not diluting or messing up with that structure and maybe adding to it? How do you view all this?
So first of all, I could say that a lot of the pricing structure for these collections here has not been, luckily, has not been my decision, if you see what I mean. Pricing your own artwork, that's really hard. What I can do is just tell you quickly how or not how, but yeah, well, how the price kind of ended where they were. So when the Harvest released, it was the standard art blocks. If you have, depending on how many you have in your collection, the starting price of the Dutch auction always starts at the same. I did have the possibility to set the price myself, but I felt it was much safer to just stick with art block skylines. So the Dutch auction started at 10 ETH, like you do when you have 400 works, and just tick down. And I didn't have any control of it, but it just sold out around 3.5 ETH. And it's kind of, yeah, I mean, the floor has been up and down, especially just after the release, but it's kind of been quite stable at 3.5 ish. So I didn't decide on that pricing, if you get my point. This is collector, driven. And the same thing with Pursuit was also, we had the price structure was always settled by AOI and Red Bull and Bybit. Both Rick and I had the same thing. I think the auction started on 3 or 4 ETH and went exponentially down, and that started selling around just under the 1 ETH mark. So again, why it ended up like this? I mean, Pursuit has a lower supply, so if you look at those mechanics there, it should be double the price, but I don't know. There's a lot of things working in on the pricing there, but I would say the market had something to do with it.
There's the provenance as well, right? Art
Exactly.
blocks is probably a little bit more prestigious in terms of provenance than
definitely
other marketplaces.
But who knows? Maybe the Velocity series will have. I mean, the provenance will have its mark in the future. They have announced that they're having a season 4. Jack Butcher is the last artist for this season. And Snowfro and Rick and I, we were the first one. Rick was the first. I was the second one. So seeing how this will evolve depends a lot on how it will be next year. But there is an idea that they're going to continue this. So who knows what the provenance will be like in a year or so. I will also say that the market at the moment is also quite difficult. So yeah, it's very hard to talk about why the prices are like that. Even, Echo Intensity was a giveaway for the people that had the passes, but the floor price now is less than what it was minted at for the people that didn't have the pass. So yeah, I would say the prices are definitely
Yeah,
collector
it's market
driven. Yeah,
dynamics.
yeah.
Yeah. And so
And
how do you approach then like bringing in new artworks to that market? How besides so one aspect to the question is the creative process behind. Are you working on anything new to add to that story you mentioned? And then how do you plan to bring that in a way that makes sense?
yeah, well, I can first kind of start off with that. So at the moment, talking about the near future, I'm actually I'm expecting my second child in December. So uh, thank you very much. So I'm expecting that I will be toning down the workload for the next few months ahead, but that doesn't mean I'm not. That doesn't mean I've stopped thinking about it. So what I'm doing at the moment now is I'm experimenting a lot with different techniques and playing around a lot with things I haven't had the time to do now before. And I'm evolving an idea in my head, which will probably be the next collection. When that would be, I don't know, but it will be sometime in 2004, May 2024, maybe after summerish. I have no idea. But what I want to do is go back to the way I worked with the harvest, where I'm doing it on my own time. It's ready when I want it to be ready and not have the deadlines. Because even though I'm very used to working that way, it was quite liberating to not work that way when working on harvest. So that's what I'm doing at the moment now, is that I'm marinating a few ideas. I want to go concept first and see where that will take me. And that collection there will definitely take the story further on the harvest.
Okay, so that sounds exciting. So I'm really looking forward to that. And um, yeah, so
Yeah,
this is all really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to that. The question I have for you now, wrapping up the podcast episode, is I assume then you're not going to go full-time artist um, in terms of your, on-chain art, or is that the plan in the years to come, at least not in the next year?
that is an excellent question. So I have to admit that Void is, I would say that it has a lot, it's an artistic process there too, even though we do a lot of, it's commercial based work, so we get clients. But the approach we do there is quite similar to how I work myself. So in some ways, I would say I'm already. I'm hard. I think it's hard to call myself an artist, but let's forego that and say I would say I'm still a full-time artist now. But if I understand you correctly, you're asking me if I'm going to go 100% NFT artist, which yeah, and maybe in the future I will. I'm definitely not quitting NFTs, and I'm definitely not quitting Void at the moment. There's too much fun to be had at Void. I would invite people to check out void.as, which is our homepage. You can see what we do there. It's more physical type of work. A lot of the creativity there goes in how we can use technology to create physical experiences, and which are just work and are kind of elegant and give this artistic feeling. That was the first part of the question. What was the second part?
Well, the question is then, yeah, are you planning any time in the future, be it next year or in 10 years, to go full time in NFTs?
So so a lot has happened this year, especially after harvest. I mean, the world turned upside down for me. I had to do a lot of adjustments, and I'm still kind of working on getting the nice balance between these two aspects of my career. At some point, I probably will become a bit too old for Void. I mean, we are already having younger people jumping in with a lot of appetite for new work. And I I would expect that at some point I would go full-time artist, and that is probably hopefully the goal. I mean, at some point, let's say 10 years, what I want to do now, and regarding when how do I put out collections in the ecosystem of the collections I already have, I'm very aware of supply and demand. So yeah, I'm very thoughtful when it comes to putting out collections and diluting what you can get. So in some point, I will be thinking long term when I'm doing my work. So you will not see a lot of work coming from me over a very short period of time. What you're going to see from me, hopefully, is that you will see a lot of work from me, but over for the rest of my life. That's kind of the goal. So hopefully, I'm quite sure that NFTs are here to stay. There will be some ups and downs, but I'm hoping that the NFT market will become stable enough that this is something that is reliable. And maybe if it's super reliable, that's maybe a time when I need to contemplate what I want to prioritize. But at the moment, I still want to do both. Just for an example, what I'm doing now at the moment, I'm focusing quite a lot on Void. We have this big 20 times 3 meter screen that's going to be installed on inside a reception of a building, which is going to have a real-time generated artwork that is going to go 24/7 for basically the rest of that screen's life. And the challenge for me is to create something that's interesting to look at 24/7. So I'm focusing a lot of, yeah, that's a huge challenge. Yeah, and it's so, and one thing I really like, and you can see in my artwork, that there is animation, but that's basically because you don't want to sit 40 seconds and wait for it to be rendered. So I want to render it partially. But what I've always liked about NFTs up until now is that it's refreshing to not have to think animation all the time, because a lot of the work we do in Void becomes very complex because everything has to be animated. And that's just to kind of emphasize the challenge of this project we're working on now. It's everything has to be animated. So I'm at the moment, I'm doing a real deep dive into shaders. I've been using shaders here and there when I have to, but I like to avoid them as much as I could because they are really scary. But the last 2-3 weeks now, I've been really nerding on shaders. I'm feeling I'm getting on top of it, and who knows, maybe that will be part of the next collection in NFT world. So there's a symbiosis between the two practices I have in Void and NFTs. One informs the other both ways.
That's what I was thinking. There seems to be an opportunity for people say bridging the gap. So it's a buzzword, but here it really makes sense, right? It's like, how do you make an experience in the physical world that enhances your digital work? And that's exactly what you're doing at Void as well. So
exactly, that was actually our, bridging the gap is something I'm not sure if that actually is on I don't think it's on the website anymore, but we had that as kind of our one-liner elevator pitch. But it's become quite used now. But I would say we can, with my hand on my heart, that this is what we actually do. We, instead of taking the physical stuff into the digital world, which we are used to with the technology, what we aim to do is taking digital stuff and putting it into the physical world. So at one installation, Delta, which we built, which is a river of lights embedded into the pavement around a block. We also have 32 3D sensors stationed around the whole block, so we know where people are at any given time and point. And knowing where they are relative to installation, we can actually animate lights exactly where they're standing, so people can interact with it, not using any app or any technical things. You just need your body and move around. That's kind of the philosophy we work with. You go there, you understand immediately what you have to do, and you just need to use your body, basically. The fun thing about that is watching grown-up people look like children because they realize that they can make some technology react by just waving their hand. It's quite fascinating to watch.
Well, I can't wait to visit that area that you put together, and I can't wait to see more of your work also come onto the blockchain. It's, as said before, you're one of my favorite artists these days, so I was very happy to meet you and talk about your work. Guys, if you enjoyed this talk, subscribe to the channel. smash the like button as well. That will help. And, Per, you were saying that you hope that NFTs become, let's say, sustainable enough in terms of the financial aspects so that you can make it a full-time career. And I was talking to Jean-Michel Payon quite recently, who founded Grail Capital and helps institutions invest in digital art. He believes that this represents a $1 trillion opportunity in the next 20 years. So for sure, we're going to see some interesting growth here. And I'm sure your work will be collected by great institutions in the future. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm wrapping it up now, and I'll let you get to work because I assume you have a lot to do.
Yeah, I do, and it's all coming. Thank you so much, Christopher. It has been a real pleasure to be here. And thank you for the opportunity. I'm honored.